welcome from your MassRIDES team. Some familiar faces here for you, I hope. So these are the folks who are really here to, obviously run your workplace program, give you all the insights and advice that you need. So as we go through this presentation, you've got great ideas or things you want to follow up on. Certainly get in touch with your outreach coordinators, your MassRIDES staff, to dig into any of these things that you want to explore a little further. They're really here for you. They're a resource to support your program. So certainly, make a note of who you need to connect with, and certainly do that after the presentation. This is me. My name's Adam. I work with Urban Trans. We do a good amount of work with MassRIDES, particularly around these webinars and sharing insights and tips on different elements of commuting, particularly in the workplace. So I'm here today. I'm going to share some of my tips and my ideas on commute costs and saving on that cost as well. I'm pretty fortunate. I have the pleasure of riding my bike to work, so my commute cost is pretty low, but I'm all too aware of some of the costs that other people incur, so we want to kind of share a little bit of that with you today. So in terms of the goal today, we want to make sure that you folks understand the true cost of your employees' commuting habits. So this is obviously a little bit for you as ETCs, but also understanding the cost of your employees' commute and the impact it has on them. We want to teach you a little bit about how you can calculate some of those commute costs, and then we want to think a bit about how you can reduce those commute costs. So when we show you some of those numbers about how much it costs to drive alone to work, for example, how can we find ways of reducing some of that cost? And then finally, think a little bit about how you can communicate cost savings to your workforce, to your commuters, to motivate some behavior change, to get them to think about changing how they get to work. So, spoiler alert, putting it out there, no big surprise, commuting costs money. We know this. And again, no big surprise, driving really does cost the most. Whichever way you slice it, driving to work on your own is the most expensive way of getting to work when we compare it with all the other modes. Doesn't matter what kind of car you drive, doesn't matter how fuel efficient, whether you've got a tiny little European mobile or this gold dip Bugatti, doesn't matter how much you spent in your car, it is going to cost you money to drive to and from work. So really, we're going to try and cover all those bases today to talk a little bit about some of those costs and what they mean for you. So one of the first things I think that's worth addressing is thinking about what we're talking about when we're talking about the cost of driving. Often when we talk to commuters and talk to our staff, really when people think about the cost of commuting, they're really thinking about the fuel. They think about the gas they put in the tank. They might think a little bit about the cost of maintaining that vehicle, maybe a service once or twice a year, maybe an oil change, that kind of thing. But really there's a real basket of costs that go into measuring a driving cost. So AAA measures this on the following. So fuel, as I mentioned, is one of them. Maintenance, repair, that's not just big issues that arise, but just regular maintenance. Thinking of repair, obviously, but also tires. Particularly in Massachusetts, thinking about potentially having winter tires, or another set of tires, two sets of tires that you're going through, wear and tear on that, changing those kind of things. Also including that is the cost of licensing, registration, the taxes that you pay on the vehicle, the insurance, which I think traditionally everyone feels is always an increasing cost, so the cost of insuring your vehicle. Depreciation is another big one that certainly we don't always think about. But if you're buying a new vehicle or a nearly new vehicle, the moment you drive that off the lot, you're going to see a depreciation in the cost of that vehicle, and that's really a cost that you're swallowing. And then thinking about the cost of things like financing or leasing a vehicle. So how much are you paying if you're not paying cash outright for a vehicle? How much are you paying to purchase or lease that vehicle? What are the financing costs involved with that? So AAA measure these put all these into their formula in terms of how they measure the cost of driving. There are additional things though that you should certainly consider when we're talking about the cost. So everything that you put into your vehicle, as we mentioned, that AAA works with, but also things like toll roads. So we know there's some of those in the state. So if you're using those toll roads, that's an additional cost that you're going to incur, certainly. And parking. Parking is a huge cost. If you pay for parking, likely you're all too aware of how much that is, and the chances are that increases on a frequent basis. So that is something that we have to factor in when we're thinking about the cost of commuting. So when we look at the AAA, and they do a study every year to kind of work out an average cost per mile of commuting. This is across the US, based on different types of mileage, and this is a very general number. So this is, your average vehicle driving an average amount, composite from across the whole country. But what you're looking at is, if you're driving 10,000 miles a year, it's about 73 cents. 15,000 miles, it's about 56 cents. 20,000, it's about 49 cents per mile. So obviously, the more you drive, the less per mile it costs you, but obviously you're increasing your mileage, so the cost is going to go up. What does that mean when we look at it just in Massachusetts? So the average annual vehicle miles traveled in the state is about 8,300 miles. So if we multiply that by the AAA rate there, so about 73 cents per mile, that means the average person who's driving alone to work is spending about $6,115 per year on getting to and from work. That is a huge cost that people are probably not aware that they're spending, and I'm guessing would like to probably spend it on something different that isn't just paying to have their car, drive it to and from work, and sit in traffic in it. What kind of things could you spend this money on? Now, I don't need to tell you where you spend your money. You are free to spend it how you want. But if it were me, these are some of the things I might think about. If I have an extra $6,000 in my pocket every year, maybe a wonderful family vacation in a tropical destination, eating out every week at a really fancy restaurant, some nice furniture for my house, maybe buying clothes and accessories, things like that. Buying a great big TV and all the electronics things they want. Maybe I want to go to a show every couple of weeks. Maybe there's all different ways that we might want to spend that money. The reason I flag this is that when we talk a little bit later about communicating the cost of a commute, it's useful to kind of remind people about what does this money look like? Where else could you use it? Do you really want to be spending this on a car, or could you change your behavior so that you could think about maybe going on that vacation, buying that new TV, that kind of thing? Another way to think of that is if you're not just thinking about what am I going to spend it on immediately, what if you invested that? What if you took $4,000 that you're saving potentially every year if you chose not to use your car and drive alone, and you invested that at a very low rate of return? I'm certainly no financial expert. I cannot guarantee this rate of return, but certainly a very low rate over 10 years. You could all of a sudden have almost $55,000. That is a very significant amount of money that can certainly help you along the way with all kinds of things. So, framing these savings in ways that are immediate and long-term is a great way of getting people to really think about that cost. What does it mean to them? It's not just the $50 they put in the gas tank once or twice a week. It's really this accumulation of costs. Seeing it in one place and getting them to really think about the impact of that. Maybe this is something that I should think a little bit more about. If you're thinking about calculating that commute, obviously you can use the numbers and do your math on the back of an envelope if you want, and scribble it all down. One of the great tools we have at MassRIDES, however, is a commute calculator that is going to do a lot of that work for you. So if you go to commute.com, you'll find our calculator there, and what you can do is you can put in all the different variables relating to your travel cost, and figure out what the overall commute cost would be on a daily, monthly, and yearly basis. So very straightforward. All you need to know is how far is your round trip to work. So you put that in. How many days a week do you drive to work? So you put that little bit of information in. You figure out your average miles per gallon on your vehicle. If you don't know that, a really quick Google of what's the average miles per gallon on a Dodge Caravan, and Google will bring it up very quickly. There are people out there that run websites who track this information very closely. So certainly you can find that information. What's the average price of gas? Put that in there. And if you're paying for parking, how much do you pay per month? So making sure we're factoring that cost in. And plugging all those numbers on the back end, the calculator will do the math using the numbers from AAA to generate a cost for you, so you can see some of what those costs are. And in a second we'll go through that so you can see some examples. This is a great tool. Again, obviously, if you're interested right now to go and play around and see how much your commute costs, but to use to engage your employees with as well. To have at an information table, promote through an email to let people know you can figure out how much your commute's costing me. If you don't believe me, you can suggestive stuff. If you're not believing what I'm saying, go and use a calculator, and you'll probably be quite surprised at what you find. So that's on the MassRIDES Commute.com website. So certainly make use of that. So what I wanted to do is kind of use that and give some examples of commute costs with some hopefully reasonably realistic examples. So we have 3 commuters that I want to introduce you to this afternoon. The first is Karen. Hey Karen, good to see you. So Karen, she travels to Tufts Medical Center in downtown Boston from Medford 4 days a week by car. She likes the flexibility of it. She's got a little 2015 Golf, but she also loves to travel, and travel not being the commute to work travel, but traveling worldwide, seeing the world, that kind of thing. So if we take some of her details, we plug them into the commute calculator, what can we see? We can see an estimated daily commute cost of about $42. Again, this is including parking as well as everything else. A monthly commute cost of about $672, and an annual cost of $8,736. That's a pretty significant chunk of change that you're paying to make sure that you get to work. The other neat thing, just to flag there at the bottom that you can see that the calculator produces, is it does show how much CO2 is produced by your trip. So again, to kind of measure that environmental impact. So that's Karen. This is our other new friend, Thomas. Good to see you. So Thomas, he lives out in Framingham. He drives from there to the outskirts of Worcester in his '95 Ford Explorer. Works fairly regular hours. Drives back and forth Monday to Friday. He's really interested in potentially renovating his basement. So he's starting to think about things he might want some money for. So what does his commute look like? So his daily cost is around $28. Monthly cost about $568. And an annual cost of $7,384. Now, one of the interesting things here, you'll see he's producing a bit more CO2. He's got an older vehicle. His engine's a bit dirtier. It's a bigger car, so it's going to produce more CO2. It also means he's going to be using more gas, and because of that, that cost is going to go up as well. So again, you can see this is not an unusual commute. That's approximately that annual cost for that. And then here we have Elizabeth. So Elizabeth lives and works in the Berkshires. She drives 15 miles to work each day in her Dodge Caravan. She's got a couple of kids, a dog. She does baseball coaching, so she's pretty busy. She's on the go a lot, so she feels like she really does need that car. So what does her cost look like? So again, using the commute calculator, she's got a daily cost of about $22, a monthly cost of about $448, and then an annual cost of $5,824. So again, these are significant amounts. For someone who's driving what they feel is a short distance every day, they're probably not even thinking about it. It really does add up in terms of the cost of that trip. So what I want to do with these folks, now that we know that they're paying quite a bit every year to commute, now that we have these new friends, we want to help them out. I want to talk a little bit about how we can save on the commute as well. So now we know how much a commute costs on average. We know how we can calculate that. We can see all the different factors. So if you're anything like me, once you know how much something's costing you, you will then think about how you can save some of that money. So I want to take you through a whole bunch of different ideas and tips on how you can save on a commute mode in both a large scale and a smaller scale. So again, spoiler alert, no big surprise. The best way to save money on driving is to do it less. So the less that you drive on your own, the less money you're going to spend on that. That's fairly straightforward. The next question is, though, how do you do that? Obviously, MassRIDES is here to really support all of the different alternatives to driving alone. These are things, obviously, you're certainly going to be familiar with. But I wanted to take you through some of these different ideas and look at them from a cost-saving perspective and see what's going to give you the best value, the best bang for your buck. So carpooling is a significant one. So sharing that ride, very straightforward. You can certainly, if you share the ride, you can directly share that cost with someone. If you share a carpool with just one person, you can cut that cost in half, 50% off, by reducing the vehicle miles that you're traveling. Whether that is in your own car, driving that less because maybe you trade on and off with someone else who's driving, or because maybe someone's reimbursing you some money for gas mileage, that kind of thing. So you can certainly reduce some of those costs. Just to put a plug in here for Bay State Commute, so in terms of a website that we have, a tool that you have available to you, so people can go online, they can find that carpool, they can find someone who's going to help them save that money, going on to Bay State Commute, putting in their commute details and finding a match is really the first step in finding that carpool partner. Okay. Just make a little effect here, make sure that there we go. Oops. Make sure there's no messages. So the next thing we can look at is thinking about finding a cheaper mode, finding a cheaper way of getting around. Now that doesn't mean buying a cheaper car. It might mean buying a more cost-efficient vehicle, but we'll talk about that later. But really what we're talking about is switching modes, getting out of the car, thinking of a different way of getting to work. Number one on that list is thinking about taking transit to work. In Massachusetts, we have a wealth of opportunity. There are 16 regional transit authorities and all the associated transit networks within those that can carry you around to work. So lots of opportunity. We certainly recommend that you communicate to staff that transit can be an option. Absolutely, we recognize that for some locations, for some staff, for some types of work, it's not going to be the best fit. For a lot of people, it actually may be more convenient and certainly cheaper than they may initially think. When we talk about transit, obviously, it's at any level, it's cheaper than driving. The cost of a ticket is going to be cheaper than driving that distance. However, there's certainly ways to save even more money if someone is interested in taking transit, reminding them that that if they buy monthly, for example, they're going to save money on fares. So if you look at the MBTA, if you pay on a monthly basis, you're paying around $85 versus a single trip of $1.70, which over the course of a month would add up. So monthly fares are certainly a cheaper way to navigate transit and to save money in that way. There can be even more savings, particularly through an employer on the transit side of things. So as an employer, you can certainly offer discounted transit passes, so you can subsidize the cost of that transit pass program. There's also some of the agencies, so MBTA in particular, offers a corporate plan that allows you as an employer to purchase passes in bulk and then provide tax advantage transit benefits to staff. So the convenience of that obviously is helpful, and then passing on that discount to your staff, again, to encourage them to take transit. Often, saving money on transit can encourage someone to consider it in a way they hadn't done before. They might consider taking a trip that is maybe 5 or 10 minutes longer, but it's saving them a significant amount of money. So it's worth them making the switch to transit. Something else to note really quickly, within Bay State Commute, as you know, by logging trips you can earn points and get rewards. One of the rewards that you're able to redeem is discounts on charter bus services such as Peter Pan. So again, you can use the trips that you're logging to earn your rewards to get discounts, further discounts on transit access. So again, it's a real great way of saving a little bit more money on that commute. Something we should know, though, I call this the small print, just recognizing that there are costs. I won't say they are hidden costs, but things that we do need to think about when we're thinking about transit, particularly if we're looking at things like commuter rail. If you are taking commuter rail, it's likely that you may want to park in one of those commuter rail stations. A lot of those stations have monthly parking fees that certainly are ranging from $30 up to $160. So that's something you do have to consider within that commute. As a sort of a little hack to see if you can find a cheaper place to park, finding somewhere that's got a little bit more availability, so it might mean maybe taking parking in a lot that's a little further out, maybe one station further out from where you normally leave from. That can reduce your parking costs. So if there's more availability at the parking lot, generally that cost will be a little lower for you. So moving on from transit, as I mentioned earlier, my commute is pretty cheap because I get to ride my bike. So there are very few fuel costs involved, other than whatever you had for breakfast and for lunch to kind of fuel you and fuel your legs, getting yourself to and from work. A new bike or even a refurbished bike is a pretty minimal investment in the grand scheme of things. I would certainly always recommend you make sure that if you are thinking about riding a bike to work, you get something that is reasonably decent. You might spend $500-600. Here's just an example of a bike available in the area right now, but something comfortable, robust, something that's going to work for you through the different seasons. But it doesn't have to be a huge investment to do that. Thinking about tune-up costs, maintenance costs, you might spend $100-150 a year just to keep everything running. But again, if we compare that to the cost of owning, maintaining, fueling a motor vehicle, it really pales in comparison. So certainly think about cycling as a really budget option in terms of getting to work. As an employer, you can boost that a little too. So you can consider offering things like a monthly subsidy for people who cycle. You know, and giving them, everyone who cycles, they're eligible to get $50 every month. So again, that lowers their commute cost. Or even bigger picture, thinking about things like a parking cash out. The idea that rather than subsidizing parking for employees, you give them the cash in place of a parking space. So if normally you offer an employee free parking, but it costs you $100, you take that $100 and you give it to your cyclist employee for them to do as they choose. So again, a great way to incentivize it, but also then to reduce their costs. Walking, even less money. Certainly you don't need a big fancy bike to do this. You might choose to get yourself some new comfortable shoes. You might get a new set of headphones so you can listen to something on your walk into work. But really, I think as most of us know, walking around is a pretty a budget-friendly way of getting to and from work. Something else you can think about, though, too, is that increased physical activity can really save on things in terms of your health. So it might save on your gym fees. If you're walking 30 minutes to and from work every day, that's not a bad workout. That might save you signing up for that expensive gym membership that you might not ever use. You're obviously going to save on parking fees, and you can potentially reduce your long-term health costs as well. Improving your heart health, improving your general well-being through physical activity by walking to and from work is a great way of making sure that you don't incur some of those big health costs later on in life. Telework is probably one of the cheapest ways. Telework and compressed work weeks. One of the cheapest ways of commuting. It's really costing you nothing because you're reducing your time on the road. If you're teleworking, completely, or a compressed work week, you might be reducing your time on the road by two or 3 days, for example. So certainly that's worth thinking about what existing policies you have at your workplace that you can look at. Are you able to work from home? Is there an option to work longer hours for 3 or 4 days a week to shorten the week that you actually work? So maybe you do 4 days at longer hours, and then on a Friday you don't work, or you work 2 or 3 days from home. Thinking about what those options are available to you. The one thing to note with telework is that it really is it's a spectrum, it's a continuum. So when we talk about working from home, it doesn't necessarily mean setting up a home office, working there 5 days a week, completely detaching yourself from the workplace. It might be doing it on a once, twice, 3 times a week basis, having that flexibility. But again, every time that you leave the car parked on the driveway, that's a saving that you're making. That's not gas that you're burning. That's not wear and tear that you're putting on that vehicle. And obviously, the huge savings in time as well, as you can see here. Your day's done at 5. You turn your chair around, and you're home already. Pretty sweet way of getting to and from work. Something else to think about if a specific mode isn't the one for you or for your employees, is think about going multimodal. So it might be that transit isn't an immediate option for you. There's nothing directly close to your neighborhood, close and convenient to your house. But what you may be able to do is drive part way to work. So rather than drive the full distance, maybe you can half the amount of time that you drive. You drive part way, you park it up. Maybe you bike as you drive to the bus station, the train station. You leave your vehicle there. Maybe you can also bike to the bus or train station. So think about switching up those different modes. There are park and ride options throughout the state. So thinking about where can you go, park your car, find a carpool, meet a carpool partner, join a van pool, connect on a commuter bus. So again, ways of driving part of the way, saving that money, and redirecting and using a different mode, driving to the commuter rail as we mentioned. And then finally, there's the park and pedal program as well. So the idea that maybe you don't need to drive all the way downtown, you drive to the outskirts of town, you park up in one of the park and pedal areas, and you jump on your bike and ride your bike the rest of the way. Again, any time you can reduce the amount of driving that you're doing, you're going to reduce the cost that you're paying for it. There's also thinking about going multimodal without the car at all. So we are starting to see more and more options in cities across the state for accessing different modes of transportation without needing a vehicle at all. So you might think, well, my main trip is a train trip, from my town to my place of work, but I live, a 10-minute, maybe I live a 10-minute drive outside of town. How am I going to make that connection? Well, there are things like bike shares, and we're starting to see and potentially going to see things like scooter share coming down the line. If you're in Boston, you'll be familiar with the Blue Bike system, the bike share system that allows you to pick up a bike from a station, rent it for 10, 15 minutes, up to half an hour, and then drop it off at a station near your destination. So great way to connect from a transit station, for example, to your place of work. The trips there, the cost ranges from $250 to an annual cost of $100 almost. Great value way of filling some of those first and last mile transit gaps. We're also starting to see more and more of these dockless systems. So the dockless bike share systems are those where you don't pick them up from a station. You have a little app, and it identifies where someone's left a bike around, maybe in your neighborhood, maybe at your place of work, somewhere where you're going to make that connection with. So lots of flexibility in there. So no longer do you necessarily need to take a bike and say, well, you know what, it's no good to me because there's no drop-off station near my place of work. These new systems don't have any kind of dock, so they can really be left pretty much anywhere. So there's examples. Lime Bike you might be familiar with, Ant Bicycle, similar kind of ideas. The idea that you use an app, you reserve the bike, take it out, do what you want, and leave it wherever it needs to be. You pay about $1 an hour for it, so very cost effective, very easy, very flexible to use. Something that you may start to see, we're seeing it across the country, more and more so. These little scooters that are popping up overnight, so little electric scooters. So Bird is one type of these. So very popular, more so than bikes. I think people are getting very comfortable just jumping on a little scooter more so than riding on a bike. You pay $1 to unlock it, and you pay 15 cents a minute to use it. Again, you use a little app, you find out where these bikes have been left around, and off you go. So a great way of maybe connecting to a transit station in a way that you hadn't thought of before, or maybe connecting to a new carpool partner. It really extends your range by having these flexible options available to you. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the different modes, the different ways that you can just drive less. And again, that's really the priority that we want to try and communicate here. You have people drive less, and it's going to cost them less. However, we absolutely recognize that there are days when you need to drive. There are situations where employees say, I just need my car on this particular day. Transit isn't an option for me. Carpooling isn't going to work every day of the week. That's fine. So one of the things I think is useful to communicate is how do we drive a little smarter, so that when we are in our vehicles, if we are driving alone, how do we reduce the amount of gas and wear and tear on the vehicles while we're actually using them. So there's 5 things here I'm going to go really quickly through. One being about choosing your car, one being about driving it smartly, one being about maintaining your engine, thinking about planning trips, and then finally thinking about moving. That's a big one. That's not quite as straightforward, but I think it's worth talking about. So first up, think about the vehicle that you're choosing. If you're in the position to buy a new car, you're looking to change the vehicle you had, think about what you need. Think about getting a smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicle. Do you really need that pickup truck? The top 3 selling vehicles in the U.S. right now are all pickup trucks. Ford, the F-150, the Silverado, the Dodge Ram. There is a time and place for those vehicles, but I very much doubt that everyone who's driving those vehicles is a contractor or a farmer who needs this big vehicle. Think about what you need for the type of driving that you do to significantly reduce the amount that you spend on gas and you spend on that vehicle. So think about those smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. Obviously, electric and hybrid vehicles are a great option, taking that extra step to really think about reducing the cost of fuel. You're running on full electric or electric hybrid vehicles, certainly an opportunity to reduce those fuel costs. There's also rebates available for individuals. So, if you're getting into one of those vehicles, you're thinking of getting into that market, you can actually get rebates to make that cost lower for you. As a workplace, this is something that you can support through charging stations, providing those in your parking at your workplace if you have that potential. And the incentives available from the Department of Environmental Protection to support that, to put some of those stations in. And again, encourage people, if they are going to drive, to think about choosing a greener and more fuel-efficient option. Okay, so you've chosen your fuel-efficient car, you're very happy with it, you've made the right choice. Now it's time to think about, driving more sensibly. Being fuel efficient, being careful with how you're driving around to make the most out of the gas that you're putting into the car. Now, some people will take this to extremes, these hypermiler folks who really will try and squeeze every last drop of energy out of the gas they put in the tank. Behavior doesn't have to be that extreme, but thinking a few small changes, thinking about how your vehicle works to really try and reduce the amount of gas that you're using. So accelerating is a big one. So accelerating accounts for about 50% of your fuel consumption. So every time you're at a red light and it goes green, you put your foot on the gas, you race off, you're really using up large amounts of fuel that perhaps you don't need to, particularly within urban and suburban contexts where all you're doing is you're racing up to the next red light or the next intersection. So slowing that down, giving yourself a good 5 seconds to get, from starting to, sort of a 20 mile an hour speed, can really reduce that cost. So avoiding those sort of jackrabbit lurching starts, those huge accelerations can save 37% of your fuel because that acceleration is really heavy on the fuel usage. So avoiding that, driving more smoothly, braking more gently, all those things, things that will make you a better and more comfortable driver are going to save you cost on your gas as well. Maintenance is obviously important. We talked about the cost of maintenance being a factor. So it's not a good idea to try and save on that maintenance by not doing it. So think about your tires, making sure that they're checked, making sure that the treads are good, that they're running properly, that they're properly inflated. A poorly inflated tire will create a real drag on your vehicle and cost you more in gas. Make sure you're checking your oil regularly. Refer to your owner's manual. A lot of modern cars are very easy to maintain. They can be a little complex. You look under the hood, it's very hard to kind of see how it's all put together. But oils is a constant. Certainly make sure that you're doing your oil changes, you're keeping that maintained. Old oil, the wrong grade of oil, can really wear out your engine and can just cause a 2% increase in your fuel consumption. If you're doing a lot of driving, that's a significant amount. So really maintain that vehicle as the manufacturer is suggesting, and making sure that the basics, the oil and the tires, are where they need to be. So your car's running smoothly, you're driving it very perfectly, everything's going as it should, so you're saving money in that way. Next is to think about how you plan your trips. Some of us do this automatically, others do not, so it's certainly worth thinking about every time you get in that car, how do you get the most use out of it? What are you going to do when you're in that vehicle? So think about, I'm going to this store. Maybe I can pick up my groceries while I'm doing it. Maybe I'm going to get the kids from school. Maybe I should go pick up my dry cleaning. It's all in the same way. Because every time you drive out, start the car up, you drive out, you come back, you drive out again, come back, drive out again to do another errand. You're using gas in that acceleration, you're using gas in the start, and you're just using gas because you're driving more. So think about that. Think about how timing impacts it. Do you need something immediately, or can it wait a day? If you know you're going to be out by Home Depot on Thursday, maybe that's the time that you need to go and pick that stuff up. Maybe you don't need it right away. So again, thinking sensibly about the journeys that you're making. Combining those trips, you could save 20-50% on your fuel by being thoughtful and planning out the way you want to move around. And finally, this is a kind of perhaps a little controversial one, but I think it's worth considering, is think about where you live and where you work. And if you're in the position of thinking of a change in your life, thinking about, maybe we need to move for all kinds of reasons, expansion of family, a change in lifestyle, whatever it is, think sensibly and carefully about where you want to choose to live. Often the assumption is, by moving further away, you're going to reduce your cost of living. You can get yourself a cheaper house. It's more affordable. But often people don't factor in those transportation costs, which can be significantly more. Whether that is just the cost of extra driving, you move an extra 20 minutes away from your workplace. That's another 40 minutes on the road every day. And obviously the cost of gas involved in that and the wear and tear on your vehicle. That's an extra a cost that you might not factor in. So even though perhaps your mortgage payment is shrinking, your monthly transportation cost is going to potentially increase. Think about the time that you spend commuting. There's been a lot of studies recently, really trying to put some numbers to the cost of that time. The time that you spend an hour in the vehicle versus half an hour. What does that mean to you? What could you be doing with that time? Doing your own thing, spending time with family, going out for dinner, going to the gym, whatever it is. That all has a cost, and by spending that time in the car, it's costing you to do that. So think about living closer to work if that opportunity arises, can reduce those commute costs, obviously, and then it also starts to open more of those options. So as you get closer to work, things that might not have been feasible for you, walking and cycling, now they might become a better option for you. So again, there's that opportunity to reduce costs. Now, I'm absolutely not saying that this is the recipe for everybody, but I think as we're talking about, saving money, different ways of being effective in how we kind of manage our personal transportation budgets, thinking carefully about where we live is an important piece of this puzzle. So just now we've sort of gone through some of these tips, I want to come back to our new friends here, our new commuters, and see if we can help them save a little bit of money. So if you remember Karen here, she is our Tufts employee. She's coming in from Medford 4 times a week. She's spending almost $9,000 a year on her commute. So what might her options be? So I'm suggesting that maybe she can jump on the T, get on transit, and really save herself some money. So she could rent one of these line bikes. She could pick up a bike that she's found just down the street from her. She's taking a ride to catch the 134 inbound bus. She's going to get off. She's going on Wellington Station. She's going to take the Orange Line all the way to Tufts. That will cost her about $1,200 a year, give or take. For her, that's a saving of over $7,500. Again, hugely significant. So she's all ready to plan her trip to Fiji, and she might even be able to get a couple of trips out of that. That's a big saving that she's making. Okay, let's check in with Thomas here. So remember, Thomas is coming from Framingham out to Worcester. He's spending, again, just over $7,000 a year on his commute. So his best option is probably carpooling. So Thomas, he's signed up to Bay State Commute, and he's found a carpool match with someone who works at his office. So him and his carpool partner, they alternate driving week by week. He's directly cut his commute costs in half. Great scenario for him. He's saving about $3,600 a year. So he's off. He's off to go. He's actually going down to Home Depot, and he's going to start designing that man cave in his basement. He's going to get his big TV. He's going to get his big comfy couch, because now he's got this big chunk of change that he's saving every month. And then finally we have Elizabeth here. So remember, she lives out in the Berkshires. She's spending almost $6,000 a year on her commute. What are maybe some of her options? So one of the things we're suggesting for Elizabeth here is to think about working from home 3 days a week. As we said, working from home is something that you don't have to do every day, but by choosing to do it 2 or 3 days a week, you can really start to reduce that cost. So she's going to reduce that cost significantly. She's going to invest in a better desk, so she's comfortable. Certainly not required, but she's making that commitment. She's going to pay a little bit of money for a nice desk so she can work comfortably at home. Her commute now, 2 days of driving, the rest of the day at home is probably going to cost her about $2,500, saving almost $3,500 every year. So what's she going to do with it? Well, if you remember, she's got a couple of kids. They're going to start thinking about going to school anytime soon. So she's going to start putting that money away and investing very carefully and sensibly in the stock market. So, in 10 years' time or so, she's going to have a very healthy college tuition fund to help with her lifestyle. She thinks that's a much better way of spending her money than spending it sitting in a car. So having shown you those examples, I think they're a good way of getting the message out and communicating why it's important to talk about saving money as a way to get people to think about changing their travel behavior. So providing those real-life examples can be really helpful. So explaining to staff, what does it mean to save $5,000 a year can be significant. Having someone use the commute calculator can really help them realize what the true costs are. As I say, getting them away from just thinking about whatever they put in the gas tank this weekend at the gas station, to thinking about, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was spending $6,000 a year on this. That's a real number that makes you think I could probably do something a little better with it. Talk about promoting those immediate savings, but also those long-term savings. So I think it's easy to sort of and I've done it here, sort of say, oh, you can spend it on a great vacation. It seems a little frivolous, but really getting people to think about what does it mean to have this money that currently you're investing in driving to work, could be invested somewhere else. It could be a long-term payoff for you. And then on the employer end of things, how do we make the non-driver loan modes financially attractive? So what else can we do to not just say, well, it's cheaper if you ride your bike, but actually what can we do to incentivize that even further? So we're going to pay you to ride your bike. We might give you a subsidy. We might do a parking cash out. Thinking about those options to really sort of add to the value of that saving is going to be important. So just as we get to the end here, I wanted to flag a couple of ways in which MassRIDES can really help with this. One we've talked about quite a bit is the Commute calculator. So again, there's that tool. It's available. It's right there on the website. Everyone can go along, play with it. You can have a little contest, see who in the office spends the most on their commute. Shame someone into rethinking how they do it. But it's a useful tool to get people to really understand that cost for them. There's also the Base State Commute tool, which we talked about in terms of finding carpool matches. We talked about in terms of logging trips to get rewards, but also by logging trips, you can start to see the cost savings that you're making. So every green trip that you're making and you're logging on there, you're going to start to see over the course of the month and the year the kind of savings that you're making on that trip. So again, a great way to sort of showcase, oh, this is really having an impact on me. And of course, by logging those trips, you're going to get points that you can redeem for certain rewards and get discounts. So it's only not necessarily huge amounts of money, but it could be a free coffee every week, an extra donut, something like that. Again, every little bit helps. Further MassRIDES support is really available in terms of getting to understand your commuter needs and options a little better. So doing survey work to understand where people are coming from, what kind of options are best suited for them, talking to staff directly about the commute calculator. All these things are some of the work that we at MassRIDES can provide and support you in that. We can do meet your match carpool events. So carpool events being the opportunity to bring people together, find a carpool, find people who live in their area, make that connection. We do try it day events as well, so getting people to try something different, trying transit for a day, realizing that it might be effective and useful for them. That's certainly something that we can help with. And then just to note that something that's going to be coming next year is we're currently working on a guide to telework for workplaces. So really a guide, a handbook that you as workplaces can use to understand what we mean by telework and the processes involved in developing a telework program and some of the resources that you'll need to actually build your telework program and get staff working from home a few days a week, again, reducing that commute cost for them. So that's something to look out for in 2019. All right, so just to wrap up really quick here, what have we learned? Hopefully we've learned a lot today. Hopefully it's been useful for you. Right from the get-go, commuting by a single occupant vehicle costs more than you think. So certainly let's keep reminding people that. Let's keep that front of our minds that it's more expensive than you might think to drive your car on your own. The cost of that convenience is significant. It's more than gas. It's more than just the cost. It's also thinking about parking, tolls, everything else that we mentioned today. By choosing a green commute option, you can yield some significant savings, whether it's carpooling or transit, cycling or walking. That's the way to save money on that trip. That's the way to take those few $1,000s every year and put them elsewhere and not into your vehicle. If we can help employees visualize those savings and maybe dream about spending them, giving them some great ideas, that can be a really good motivator. So think about that the next time you're doing a try it campaign, the next time you're talking to your employees about getting them to think about carpooling, get them to think about what kind of savings they can make and maybe inspire them to dream a little bit about what they might spend those savings on. And then finally, as a reminder, there's lots of different commute options. There's lots of different ways you can piece those together. I think one of the key things to remember is flexibility. So it's not about necessarily saying you must switch to one particular mode of transit for 5 days a week. Because suddenly you're a transit user. It might be that you take transit a couple of days a week. You drive a little bit, you park and you pedal for another couple of days. All those different options are available. So getting employees to recognize that they can be flexible is certainly going to be an important part to help them feel comfortable in making that kind of switch. And again, MassRIDES is here to help with that process and to support particular needs that you might have and interests and ways you want to explore this a little bit further. So that's sort of the formal part of the presentation. I wanted to kind of open up for questions. If you have questions, I'm going to open my little chat bar here. Let's see if we can do this. If anyone has questions, I do have some questions that we received during the session. So where are we here? Let's open the chat bar. Okay. So not seeing any. What I'm going to do is I have a list of questions here that sort of I picked up during the course of the session. So I will go through these, and hopefully, if this is your question, hopefully it's going to answer it properly. So the first question, is my company liable if something goes wrong in our carpool program? So really a carpool relationship is the responsibility of two or more parties involved. So it's those folks' responsibility. So it's up to them to negotiate payment terms and everything else within that. So it's certainly not the responsibility of you as a company. Okay, second question we have here. I don't have any public transportation nearby, but I'm interested in finding a new commute. How can I figure out other options? So certainly Bay State Commute, we mentioned that. That is probably the first place to go. Set up a profile on Bay State Commute to look for carpool and vanpool options that are available to you. You can also get in touch with MassRIDES to get a personalized travel plan, to look at other options, transit options in particular, that are going to be based on different combinations that might not come up with a Google search. So if you're familiar, mapping your trip with Google, you can do a transit trip, you can do a bike trip. What Google doesn't do is necessarily piece those things together for you. So if you want to go multimodal and figure out, oh, is it an option for me to bike to the train station and get on the train and then, scoot at the end of it, that's something that we can help you with by doing that personalized travel plan. Okay. Another question here. I'm interested in carpool but enjoy the quiet of being alone. Do I have to talk to my carpool partners? My gosh, you'd be amazed how often we get that question. That's really up to you and your carpool partner. We recommend when anyone starts a carpool, you have that conversation, you figure out what works best for you, you set some of those ground rules. You meet someone before you even start that carpool. If it's not something you feel that you want to ride in the car with, that's fine. You don't always have to find that perfect match. Another option might be the van pool, though, as well. So a van pool often, with more people in the van, it certainly allows for different types of personalities. If you want to just sit at the back and put your headphones in and not talk to anyone, no one's really going to care about that. So certainly think about that as an option. Okay. Will I really save money taking the commuter rail instead of driving? Passes are often a couple of $100 a month. That is absolutely true. So one of the things we didn't talk about in any detail here is the sort of the varied cost of the commuter rail. Obviously, that's very much zone-based and distance-based fares. So that cost will certainly vary, and if you're coming from a longer distance, that cost will be higher. However, really, again, when we think about the true cost of driving to work, all those things involved in it, the parking, the wear and tear, the fuel, you're absolutely going to save money on that. In addition to the comfort of not sitting in traffic and not having to drive, as expensive as it may seem, it's going to be cheaper to use that commuter rail than than driving yourself alone. Okay, another question. Will I still save money if I can only take a green commute 2 days of the work week? Yes, absolutely. So one of the things I mentioned a couple of times there, and just to reiterate, anytime you're not driving your vehicle, you're not driving alone, you're going to be saving money. And, you can watch that money kind of be saved as you sit and you leave your car on the driveway. You can leave it, go past it on your bike, think about the money that you're saving. So absolutely, anytime you're not driving, you're going to save that money. Okay. How do most folks split the cost between the driver and passengers? So we mentioned this a little bit, but just the different ways of doing it. And as we said, it's really down to the individuals how you work it out. So some people, what they do, and I think we talked about this with our example here, Thomas, people switch off driving. So maybe they trade week to week or month to month. So you're only driving half as much and they use each other's vehicles. If though maybe only one person has a car, again, you can set up a relationship to say, well, maybe someone else will fill up the tank once a week, or you use that commute cost calculator to figure out what the trip would be and reimburse them for that amount of money. It's a discussion. It's something where there's no sort of hard and fast rule. Again, you and your carpool partner will kind of figure out what's a fair and reasonable amount to do that. Some people choose not to do it at all. Some people say, you know what, I'll drive. You're in charge of getting the coffee every day, and that's fine too. There are great options now, things like Venmo and PayPal, obviously for transferring money. It doesn't just have to be cash, where those options are available too. Okay. So do carpools just split the cost of gas, or do they also factor in the wear and tear on the car? How do you determine the cost of that? So again, it's really up to both parties. Certainly use that commute cost calculator if you want to include that wear and tear, or you can take that out as well. Or you can use the IRS reimbursement rate per mile, which is currently about 54 cents a mile. So it's really down to you. Again, it's down to you as sort of the people in the carpool. You have that relationship. You discuss what works, and certainly be flexible with it. You might find over time that it feels like maybe you're not getting reimbursed enough, or you can contribute more. So certainly there's different ways of looking at that. Okay, I have a few more questions in here. Okay. What are resources for companies to implement incentives? My company said it would cost them too much to do it. Okay. 1 second here. So really, it's something that a company needs to budget for if they want to look at. But one recommendation I would make is that you need to build a case for it and find the right budget to try and request it from. And it might be a longer term process. It might not be that immediately we can turn around and give everybody $50 for riding their bike, but maybe there's a broader strategy that this plugs into, a sustainability strategy, a corporate social responsibility strategy, that over time this could get built into a budget. It's certainly not something we see every company do in terms of reimbursement, but it is something that can be building a case for it, thinking about it long term, and identifying maybe the best place to draw that from is probably a strategic way to go about that. Okay, what else do we have here? I looked into van sharing, but it's $1,000 a month. It's hard to motivate 5 people in a rural setting. Any ideas on how to decrease van pool costs? I mean, I think it is about increasing the number of people in that van. The more people in the van, you can reduce the cost of that. So really, I think it relies on getting the message out about the vans that are available. If they're coming from a particular area and you're in a workplace, how do you promote that as something that might be interesting to them? Doing a MassRIDES survey, identifying where everybody's living, you might be able to identify a pocket of people. So even though 5 people have sort of said they might be interested, there might be a few other folks that you could contact directly because they're all in that similar area. So trying to do that might be helpful. And Diane, thank you. Just to add to that, so MassRIDES and Bay State Commute, we can help find those riders for the van pool, so we can dig into it that way as well. We can do those events, we can do matching events to really drum that to support up. So absolutely, the message should be, if this is something you're interested in and the challenge is getting people to be motivated by it, that's absolutely our area of expertise. So that's the kind of thing we can come in and help you with. Okay, there was another question in here. Does depreciation cost take in the time a car is owned versus the saving on accrued mileage? That is a good question. I don't think it does. So the AAA does consider the depreciation. I don't think the calculator is balancing that off against the accrued mileage. And obviously, you're absolutely right. Like if you still own the car that you're going to need anyway, that is a sunk cost, obviously, that you're going to incur. The ideal situation is that you don't get that extra car, you don't get a new car. But yes, certainly some of that depreciation, some of that insurance is going to be a cost that is kind of baked in if you have that vehicle already. So that's certainly worth thinking about. But again, shaving off that cost of gas, shaving off the cost of, you might even be reducing insurance because you're not driving as much. That's all part of those savings. Yeah, so what we'll do, we'll send through the link to the 2017, which is the latest AAA guide. There may be another one coming out very soon for 2018. They usually come around this time of year. So we'll certainly send that out to everyone so that can be seen. Okay, just looking through here. I don't see any further questions. Okay. So seeing no further questions, just wanted to say thank you all for your time. Hopefully this has been useful to you. We'll be able to circulate a recording of this presentation. Will be up on YouTube, so again, you can look at it. You can share with your networks, and again, you can use to share your work site too, to kind of share some of this knowledge and these tips amongst your workplace. But certainly appreciate your time. As I mentioned, if there's any further questions, certainly reach out to us directly here at MassRIDES, and we can kind of follow up with you. But for now, thanks very much for joining us.